about another minute for everyone to join this session. But as you're joining, if they're one thing that we like to do in these panel webinars, we want them to be conversational. We want them to be engaging. If you all have any questions as the panelists are kind of talking through these topics, please feel free to drop them into the chat. I'll say hi in the chat right here. And we'll take those questions as we go. Hi, Raphael. Awesome. We'll just give everybody a minute and then we'll introduce our panel. Got an exciting conversation today. Awesome. All right. Well, today we're going to be talking about unified measurement, kind of the foundation of unified measurement, which is the power of a data foundation and attribution. So I'm really excited for the panel that we have here today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Julia, if you want to start and kind of give us an introduction.
Sure. Hi, my name is Julia Noble. I am the Director of Data Analytics at Away. I've been working in data analytics for my whole career, and it's something I'm really passionate about. And here at Away, we're super excited to be on our Rockerbox journey. We're about 6 months in, and it's been a hugely helpful tool. So super excited to speak to how that's helped our marketing efforts here.
Awesome. Rick, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Rick. I'm one of the co-founders and CTO here at Rockerbox, and we've been working with customers like Away and other kind of partners in the space to really help folks build out the best solution possible for helping them measure marketing. So really excited to talk through a lot of the topics that we have here today.
All right, and hi everyone, I'm Tylynn Pettrey from Chalice Custom Algorithms, and we work with the clients across the board to help optimize their ad campaigns based on measurement strategies that we're seeing. So I've been in the space for about 3 years, coming from academics, and very excited to work closely with the Rockerbox team and talk more about measurement and all it can do for advertising campaigns.
Awesome, thank you all. All right, so we're going to start the conversation really on this like data centralization for attribution piece. So I think we should start by laying the groundwork for successful attribution. And this is something that we all know begins with having a strong centralized data foundation. So when it comes to managing marketing data across multiple channels, what do you all see as the essential elements for building a centralized, deduplicated foundation that can support accurate attribution? And kind of additional to that, maintaining data quality over time is definitely an ongoing challenge. We see it with customers every single day. So what best practices have you seen in ensuring this foundation remains reliable and up to date? And I think, Tylynn, I'd love to kick it off with you.
Sure, happy to kick it off. There's so many things that you can do to ensure that quality data is reaching your measurement partners, but there's a few key elements that I always like to discuss. And one is centralizing your data sources. When you're working across multiple platforms, you might have data logs coming from the trade desk, you might have information coming from Meta, from TikTok, and then your own CRM data, and these all live in separate places. For measurement, it's essential that you have them all in one unified location so that you don't have to string together 4 different queries and try to tie everything together from discrepant sources. One thing I always like to see is when a client has one source of a cloud database. It could be Snowflake, AWS, but a centralized location that provides a source of truth. The other thing is your delivery pipelines. Logs can come in at all different delivery cadences and different times, especially when you're working across multiple platforms. Writing batch delivery systems that can keep all of this synchronized and clean in your database is essential. If you have different logs coming in at different cadences, that can be fine, but you need to make sure that you're keeping track of your timestamps and your loading processes. So there's no question of, is my trade desk data fresh? When did my YouTube data come in? Is it safe to provide measurement analysis on this data, considering that they may have come in at different times? Another thing is that we also want to make sure that there's some standardization. If you work across multiple advertising platforms, the logs look very different. They may have different columns, different naming conventions, and may have different levels of aggregation. So standardizing your data and making sure that it's apples to apples is also extremely important.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a lot of a bunch of the big components that Rockerbox really digs into. I think one of the things that we consistently think about is really who does the work for that. So there's a lot of different players in the space that essentially can help with the idea of building that centralized data foundation. But really, when you're thinking about that problem and building that out and building out the standardization, one of those fundamental questions to ask is really like, who does the work? Is it going to be an internal data team? Is it going to be your analytics team? Is it going to be a third party? Are you going to be using a variety of tools to build it? You might be using Fivetrans, you might be using Snowflake, you might be using other mechanisms to kind of pull data together, but really understanding like who's doing the work, how much of that work ends up being something that you're purchasing versus something that you're assembling yourself. And then really making sure that you have a good understanding internally of where you want to be spending time. So do you want your analytics team kind of being responsible for assembling that source of truth and that data foundation? Or do you want to be running analyses and answering questions that might be more specific to your business or to your marketing? And I think for our customers, we've really seen that the balance kind of shifts for those analytics orgs to wanting to focus in on those business specific questions, the things that are going to drive impact to their marketing on either a day-to-day or even on a longer cadence, being able to explore different areas where they might not have been able to before if they were focusing on the ETL components and really pulling that data together.
Yeah, that's a really good point, especially because ETL is not a one-time process. This is not something where you can set up your data pipelines and then assume that everything's coming in fresh, up to date, and clean. There's consistent problems with duplication, for example. What if your logs get loaded twice? Something has to be caught or it's going to be double counted. Or what if there are missing values in the data? There has to be continuous checks and validations performed, and that's something to consider before you jump into setting up an ETL pipeline.
It's really interesting. The normalization is a huge part about what we do internally at Away, because we've had many different people sit on our marketing teams over the years. We've used many different programs over the years. So really ensuring that, you know, if we called something paid search in 2017, are we still calling paid, like using those same UTMs to categorize paid search today? Something that we're really lucky is that because we've used multiple programs over the years, actually a lot of our data is static. So it is a one and done, one time. At one point, we've categorized it this way. Let's keep categorizing it that way today. But we do check in probably every quarter with our marketing teams and make sure that we're really consistently applying UTMs to ensure that our categorization can be consistent down the line. And every day, you know, if I see a spike in direct traffic for Away, I'm always like, oh, did we miscategorize something? But always really just bringing it back to that normalization and making sure that we have the most accurate attribution that we can.
And as much as possible, automating, I think is the other big component. So the more that you're able to automate, the more that you're able to proactively understand if those things are happening, like what you're describing around whether that direct percentage is going up. Like that's a great insight rather than kind of checking in, you know, 2-3 weeks later and it's like, hey, where did that inconsistency come from? Oh, we forgot, or we removed a UTM parameter or something like that. So that's been a big portion of what we've focused in on as a product as well, is to try to help with some of those automations to make sure that we're automatically adding those parameters to campaigns and keeping that tracking in order for our customers.
Yeah, that's a great point, especially when you're considering shorter term strategies like MTA. You don't want to find out 3 weeks later that you've been optimizing your campaign based on incorrect or outdated data.
Awesome. I actually think that's a great kind of lead in to our next question. So let's dive into MTA, or multi-touch attribution. It often acts as a powerful analytical layer that helps marketers understand the real impact of each touch point. That's really what multi-touch attribution helps with. So from your perspective, how does MTA serve as the ideal framework for analyzing data on top of a strong foundation? So on top of this kind of foundation that we've been talking about, what attributes or data components have you found to be the most effective in improving the accuracy and reliability of MTA? And Julia, I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so we are about 6 months into using Rockerbox here at Away, and so we're definitely on the beginning of that journey, but definitely using it day to day to inform our campaign optimizations and where we want to be, you know, putting more spend or less spend. So for us, we really felt that we needed an MTA at Away because internally we have our last click attribution model where we can, you know, understand where traffic is coming from and help attribute orders that way. And then we obviously have platform level attribution. Those are two very different ends of an attribution spectrum. And we really felt that we needed something in the middle to help us understand, channel overlap, and also that path to conversion. So it was really optimal for us to have this layer here to help us, really better understand, for us, particularly that path to conversion, and specific attributes that have helped us to really, make this MTA work for us have been, honestly, one, constantly checking in right now as we're on the building journey and checking our attribution windows and, analyzing what things could look like across different attribution windows, as well as, the custom integrations that we've been able to do with Rockerbox. Rockerbox has been super helpful in building out custom attributions for us for direct mail and for spend that might not be able to automatically be pulled into the platform. So those have really helped us increase that accuracy. And the Rockerbox team has really helped us, talked us through as we've made these decisions and made these improvements to the model.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you touched on is, or a few different things related to like direct mail as an example. But I think the interesting thing about MTA and kind of its position in the scope of all analytics tools right now is that MTA is basically like the user level analytics tool that's built for marketers. So if you think about GA or you think about Amplitude or your CDPs, like some of those are built for marketers to do specific things, or they might be trying to help with segmentation, or they might be helping with product analytics, or just like where is the traffic coming from. MTA's goal is really to help marketers and marketing teams get that user level granular insight into what has happened with users as they've come to site and really understand all of the things associated with marketing. So I think like where other tools kind of have some of those components, I think GA does a great job with collecting UTM parameters. But if you really wanted to have something like an ROI from GA, it's going to be exceedingly difficult to be able to calculate that. Same thing if you were working with a product analytics tool where you'll get a lot of that site traffic. You'll be able to start to tag some of those, but it's not necessarily giving a marketer the type of reporting that they need for them to understand kind of like the nuance or the overlap between those different channels. So that's really where we kind of think about that user level marketing and MTA being the thing that really fits into that bucket.
Yeah, and I mean, for us, it's been just like a huge insight into that upper funnel, for our TV and our streaming, things that aren't going to appear in those, web-based models. Like we use Amplitude to collect site data, and like you're just never going to see those upper funnel touch points. So to have a model that's going to, at least in some ways, synthetically give us those touch points and understand how those upper funnel touch points are interacting with our lower funnel has just been like a huge insight for us and really helped us optimize those channels better.
Yeah, and I think tools like Amplitude do a good job of being able to kind of break down customer activity. So you're able to like dig into, hey, what are some attributes that might be associated with specific customers? I feel like where MTA kind of overlaps with that is being able to dig back in and say like, hey, for this type of customer, this product or this purchase that was made, how can I go and like retroactively understand what marketing drove them to site? I think with a lot of other tools that might function as an analytical foundation for marketing, you're not necessarily having the ability to retroactively go back and say like, hey, what was that segment of customer that I ended up converting on my site, and what types of marketing actually were served to them that drove them to the site during that time. So MTA gives a lot of that ability to do those retrospective, granular, historical analyses that I think a lot of other tools can do if you're really smart about setting it up ahead of time. But oftentimes you don't necessarily know what the question is that you want to answer 6 months from now. So it's more difficult to be able to kind of design your campaign naming structure, your targeting, or your test to be able to measure those things because really you're looking to understand the results of what actually happened.
The granularity of MTA is really interesting on the optimization side too. Tools like can give you a great overview of how a channel is performing long term and where you should shift budget, where the point of diminishing return is. But when you're thinking about user level optimizations and campaign strategy, the MTA measurement really helps you action in a more nuanced manner.
Awesome. We do have a question that I think is kind of relevant to this question. And Rick, I'm going to throw it at you. Marissa said her agency is bringing on bigger clients that may warrant a Rockerbox partnership. But until then, what tips do you have for companies that don't quite meet the minimum threshold required to work with Rockerbox? And essentially it means like smaller brands. What's your recommendation there for brands who might need an MTA solution, but aren't quite ready for something like Rockerbox?
I think data organization is the biggest component of being able to really effectively understand what's happening in your marketing. So you can go a long ways with GA if you have specific channels or even within your own platform reported statistics. If you're not employing a large channel mix or you don't necessarily have a lot of overlapping strategies, the platform numbers can end up being a really good source of truth. And I would say that that's really where we end up telling customers to focus if they're really interested in optimizing one campaign versus another within a platform. It's the platform numbers are going to give you the best readout for that type of information. But when you're really trying to understand how does that overlap or how is retargeting and branded search playing together, you're not going to get that type of insight from anywhere else. So that's been a big focus, I think, for smaller brands is really get organized early, have a good understanding and nomenclature of how those marketing campaigns should be structured and kind of use them to optimize and improve your overall data quality. Awesome.
We've got a couple more here. I'm just going to take these questions now, and then we can jump into the next one. Raphael asked, might have missed this, but what level of granularity is possible with a solution like Rockerbox? I heard user, but does that mean potentially having, let's say, search term level granularity? And Rick, I'm going to pass it to you again.
So it's campaign level granularity typically. So depending on how that, or ad set, depending on the platform, but we would go off of what are the named objects that you set up in a platform, not necessarily the targets that you set up in a platform. So there are folks that historically would employ like single keyword ad groups within Google, and those would be reportable objects within Rockerbox, but we wouldn't have something like keyword automatically broken out for branded search or non-branded search. That would be something where if you would want that type of granularity, we would recommend you to go through the strategy of breaking those things out. And then that's something that you could definitely report out on from an MTA perspective.
Awesome. And last question in this section, and then we have one that's kind of relevant to another question, so we'll save that one. But what algorithms are you using under MTA method here?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit around just what we're doing at a high level from an MTA perspective, from a data-driven perspective. We're essentially using a logistic regression to take in kind of the marketing exposures and predict conversion. So MTA ends up being a credit distribution model that basically says if there's 2 touch points, how should we distribute credit? There's lots of ways that you could do this within Google or even within the Rockerbox tool. You could do even distribution, you could do U-shaped, you could choose first touch, you could choose last touch. All of these are different ways of taking user level data and having it roll up to a final report. So one of our data-driven models is that that logistic approach, but we definitely work with customers to essentially build out and use the right framework for whoever that customer is. And sometimes it's being able to use last touch for high-level reporting, but then you want the even or just being able to dig into those paths to purchase to really understand the overlap and the intricacy of the marketing.
Awesome. Thank you all. And thank you for the questions. If you have any more, feel free to drop them in the chat. All right. So moving on, kind of like refocusing in on this marketing control center. Every marketer, and we've kind of touched on this already, wants a comprehensive view of their marketing, ideally with real-time or close to real-time insights across every channel. So setting up this like marketing control center, or this concept that acts as a reliable command hub for these kind of insights, it can be really complex. So could you share your experiences with building workflows and reporting setups that successfully enable this type of control center? And then what specific approaches have worked well in creating a reliable cross-channel view that supports agile, data-driven decisions? And Rick, I know that you have just answered a lot of questions in the chat, but I'm going to toss it to you first.
Yeah, and apologies. I may lose my voice at some point. So just throwing that out. I've been a little bit scratchy in the throat this past week. But at a high level, I think when we work with customers, our goal is to be able to get them to the point where there's a operational kind of like centralized place where they turn to leverage Rockerbox data or their marketing data in general. So this really boils down to like, how do we build out a dashboard that is the source of truth that your team or your organization is going to be able to use, where the CFO can look at it and get their information related to how much was spent. The CEO can have insight from the marketing team on what's working. Channel managers could look at it and say, which creative or which messaging is resonating, so that they're able to build out more of that, or what targeting is working so they can perform more of those types of optimization. So I really think a lot of it has to do with how do you build out that internal source of truth. Some folks use the Rockerbox UI for that, but other folks are pulling it in through warehousing and setting up those dashboards internally. And that's a really powerful place to be. And I think a lot of businesses, as they continue to scale, really need their own internal tool to be able to power some of those internal insights.
Yeah, so as someone who works in data analytics, this is my bread and butter. So at Away, we really spent a lot of time over the last couple of years auditing our historical data, doing that normalization, doing that real foundational work that we were speaking to earlier today. And what came out of that is that we have our web data, we have our orders data, we have our marketing data, and they were these disparate data sets that we use Looker for our BI tool. And while Looker is fantastic, to merge data that live in disparate data sets is actually very difficult for any like normal user. It would take really a power user to be able to combine these data sets into something that gives us that really holistic overview. So it was a big project between the growth marketing team here at Away and data analytics, where we said, okay, we need to pull all of these things together into one big performance data set. And right now we have that live at the campaign type and campaign subtype level, but we're doing the orders attribution, the marketing spend, and the web traffic all in one spot. And it's really a dream of mine to build this out. And I love the flexibility that we're getting from data warehousing with Rockerbox, that I could roll that data up to that same campaign type level and merge that into that data set really seamlessly, because we're tracking things the exact same way. Or I could even merge that onto my orders data set, because we're doing order level attribution here. Like, it really can plug and play and work with all of our other data sets. And while we haven't made the big call on how we want Rockerbox to fit into that really big holistic data set, we've been able to surface it on our own within our BI tools and do, maybe those little bit harder merges, or at least add them into our high level dashboard so that we can really see how Rockerbox, or like how the Rockerbox results are playing against our last touch results. So it's super helpful. We use data warehousing every day here. But it's been super helpful with us, and also just being able to, play around ad hoc, cut our own views of this data has been really helpful, and just, exploring it and seeing, different data types, and not year over year yet, but month over month, and just comping those things have been super helpful for us. And while the Rockerbox UI is fantastic for that, we really love being able to have the dynamic control to play around with the data.
Yeah, I think a big component on our side is to be able to power teams to have access to the level of granularity, so that they're able to use it to really explore the data in the way to answer your specific business questions. And I think that's been a big component of what we've learned over, I would say, like the past, however many years, 5 years in the attribution space, is really how unique each business is. So although many businesses are the same, the marketing platforms are the same, what you do with that information, how you run, how you think about cutting the data, how you think about lifetime value of customer, how you think about new versus returning customer, lapsed customers, all of these things are pretty nuanced to specific e-commerce businesses and how they think about that entire process of re-engagement. So that's been a big component of what we focused in on, is getting the data into the hands of the analytics teams, not necessarily the data engineering teams, but the analytics teams, so that the analytics teams can immediately get access to that and not spend a ton of time doing the big building blocks, but are able to dig in and really answer those questions. So that's been, I'm excited to hear kind of what Away has been able to do with it.
Yeah, and I would say with the data warehousing, it was also, we were setting up that integration. I was like, oh, how much time are we going to need to really stand this up and get this into reporting? And I was like, well, no time at all, because this is probably the cleanest data set we've ever received. It was just ready to plug and play. It requires no transformation. It was something that we could just push directly into our Looker instance and immediately start getting to play around with. So super helpful for us.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So now we're going to move on to kind of the technical strategies for scalable data. So if we're talking about the technical side of managing data, consistently collecting clean, scalable data that's primed for analysis is a significant challenge for a lot of organizations. You both touched on that, particularly those dealing with like high volumes of data. So in your experience, what are some of the most effective strategies or tools that you've employed to ensure data remains clean and scalable and able to support the ongoing attribution and analysis as your organization grows and adapts? And Julia, let's start with you here as you're actively navigating this for your company today.
Yeah, it really gets back to what we were talking about earlier with like the foundational data sets. For us, it's been having a single source of truth. We, in our transformation layer at Away, utilize DBT, and essentially for every external model that we were running for marketing purposes, we were creating a different model, going back to all of the same source data and recreating the same thing. And what would happen is we would adjust one of those models to maybe account for a new campaign name or different syntax on campaigns, trying to group things correctly. We would update it in one spot and we would forget to update it in the other two. And what was that was causing was incorrect data being sent some places. So we did a big overhaul, and we have one single source of truth when it comes to marketing data these days. One place that we're aggregating all of our spend data into one comprehensive data set, and we use that to build the rest of our models downstream. So really, that single source of truth has been used for us. It makes sure that we're really consistent and we're really clean about how we look at our data at Away, and especially our marketing spend data. So that was really, really huge for us. And we use that data, gets fed into Rockerbox, it gets fed into our MMM, it goes into various different models, and it's what we use as our source of truth for what did we spend last week. So that's been really, really big for us, making sure that we're keeping stuff clean and keeping things normalized across different partners.
Yeah, another thing that I found really helpful is all the automation tools available to help streamline this process once you have this set up. For example, we use Airflow just to make sure that it's a repeatable process every time that we're loading data, so we don't have to worry about some process breaking or a bunch of ad hoc processes running at the same time. Everything goes through an Airflow DAG, and we know what the table is going to look like coming out on the other side. Another important thing is monitoring. So tools like Datadog can help streamline that. If you have a defined checklist of what's going to throw a flag that an engineer, analyst, et cetera, needs to look at, you can set that up proactively in Datadog, so you're not coming through the data in a hands-on way every day. You just have to pay attention to the alerts and then go look at it from that point.
Yeah, and I think you both covered kind of like the 4 big buckets that I think about, or we've talked about all of them, but warehousing, orchestration, some sort of data cataloging. So orchestration being Airflow or Prefect or something like that if you have downstream pipelines to run. Data cataloging being something like DBT, where you're able to really define what a model looks like, or Cube or something like that, where you're able to take something that's raw data and turn it into something that an analyst can look at, understand the schema, and not need to go and dig into other documentation. And then obviously, last but not least, the BI tool for just being able to build stuff out, I think is just a really useful mechanism for sharing information. Some analytics teams are operating in Jupyter notebooks or other systems, but the BI tool is really that presentation layer, or kind of like the standard presentation layer when you're kind of sharing stuff across the organization. And we see that being something that's really important to have in that analytics stack.
Yeah, I think that's a really great lay on to any of the tools that the data and data science and engineering teams would use. Because even when you're using these results and making optimizations based on the output of an MTA model or MMM model, you have to be able to explain those results in a really clean, readable way. And you don't want to have to put together a presentation deck every time you make an optimization. So having a BI tool like Tableau or Looker, any of the other ones out there that can streamline the data visualizations is really helpful.
Awesome. Thank you. And we'll move on to our last question. So if anybody has any additional questions, and I know we had one on MTA and MMM, so we'll get to that one here after this question. But feel free to drop them in the chat. So finally, once you have all of this reliable data that we've been talking about, combining methodologies can bring even deeper insights. MMM or marketing mix modeling or media mix modeling, whichever term you want to use, and incrementality testing are two methods that can add immense value to your measurement strategy. How do you incorporate the findings from MMM and incrementality testing as part of a broader measurement solution? And then how do these methodologies complement other attribution techniques in really refining a brand's overall marketing strategy? And Tylynn, I'll toss this one to you first.
Yeah, I think the important thing to realize here is how complementary all of these strategies are. They're all looking at different cuts of measurement, and to get the most powerful measurement suite, you want to have a little bit of all of them when you're looking at your active campaigns. Let's use an example here. Let's say you're a D2C retail company and you're running ads on Meta, TikTok, and the Trade Desk. You run MMM measurement and you see that Meta does very well driving upper funnel conversions, but it has some diminishing point of return when you give it too much budget. Trade Desk and TikTok, on the other hand, seem to have some kind of pairing between a retargeting strategy and then your general TikTok strategy. So they're leading to some kind of incrementality, but you're not entirely sure what the interplay between these two is. And you're not entirely sure if the MMM results are accurate for a variety of reasons, and they take a long time to get back. Incrementality testing could be a great way to validate the MMM results and also learn a little bit more about where the specific conversion activity is coming between these TikTok and Trade Desk campaigns. You could do that through a geo holdout set where you segment parts of the country that receive no ads and other segments of the country that received ad, and then measure the lift between the two, or something like a PSA where you serve the blank ad. But at the end of the incrementality testing, you now have validation that these did in fact drive whatever your metric is, let's say sales lift or conversion lift. That can partner with the MMM to help validate the overall MMM findings, but also give you real-time results of exactly how incremental is this? Is it 5%, 10%, or 20%? So it helps give you a more granular numerical solution so you get a better sense of exactly what type of incrementality you're driving. To answer the MTA question, you could go even further than that. Now that you know your diminishing point of return from Meta, and then some information about the incrementality between your Trade Desk and TikTok solutions, you can also run some MTA attribution to see, for example, if I have multiple different Trade Desk strategies with different creatives, where are these conversions coming from? Is there one creative that's really showing up as impactful further in the user journey than another? And from there, I can make some decisions about what users should see what ad, or what order should I be sequencing my ads in. There's all kinds of different solutions that you can come up with from there. But using the different tools at different levels helps you come up with a cohesive campaign measurement strategy and also an optimization plan once you have all of that information, because you can make decisions at all levels, from budgeting at the top level down to creative decisionings at the campaign or ad group level.
Yeah, so I could also speak to how at Away we use our tools, together. And I think like the very cleanest cut of this is like we have dashboards that will compare the ROI based off of last click, based off of the Rockerbox custom MTA, based off of our MMM, and based off of our the platform reported ROAS. So seeing these 4 different ROI calculations side by side, while we never ever really expect them to be the exact same, they're all measuring very dramatically different ways, we do always expect them to be in line with one another. So the moment that two of those lines start diverging, that's a huge red flag to us of like, maybe something's going wrong in one of our models, or we need to dive into that further and understand this more deeply, because, and that actually did happen recently. This is something we've been working with the Rockerbox team to really understand more about why this is happening in one of our channels. But we saw the Rockerbox, our ROI decline pretty rapidly, while we actually saw all three other forms of measurement increase. So we were like, what is happening here? What's going on? And there's been multiple ways that we can really look into that with our MTA. The MTA is going to be able to provide us, are there an increased number of other touch points in someone's path to conversion that include this channel? Are we seeing too much overlap? So we were really able to leverage the MTA and dive into that. We are still troubleshooting this. We don't have a definitive answer quite yet, but it was a way for us to immediately, double check what's going on here, and let's dive into this faster and sooner. So hugely helpful. Just looking at all four in one spot has been a real big unlock for us.
Yeah, that's been kind of what we've learned from our customers over the past year, is having those numbers side by side. So we've obviously entered into MMM and testing as complementary parts of our product. But one of the big things that we've been further working with customers that have been in like the beta for both of those is, how do we actually start to bring those numbers back together? So we kind of think about Rockerbox in kind of like the two parts or three parts, being able to pull all the information together, being able to execute all of those analysis, and then ultimately making sure that we're able to provide, when a business needs a single number as an output, kind of that unified number that they're able to use for reporting that everyone agrees on. So if you have an incremental result from testing, or a ROI or marginal ROI from MMM, being able to bring those things together to validate and calibrate against the MTA data. So if MMM is actually saying like, hey, the ROI is higher, and you run an incrementality test, being able to move those numbers in that direction for that final report that you're providing. So it's no longer necessarily an MTA report that is kind of like built up from credit distribution, but it's a report that you can use internally to kind of guide that broader level decision making. So unified measurement has kind of been the thing that we've been using as the guidepost as we see the complexity arise in the space of, I think like everyone knows that we need to be doing all of these things to properly measure marketing. You need the high level historical MMM analysis. You need to be proactive in testing. You need always on measurement, but really making it so that you have good indicators of, hey, when should I be running a test? Or when should I be investigating a channel because the ROIs diverge? That's really what I think is an important part of being able to put those numbers side by side, and then ultimately be able to produce a final result so that it kind of gives your organization a definitive number to point against and say like, hey, that's the number that we decided to optimize against. It's the result of, bringing together the MTA result, the MMM result, and that test that we ran during that period of time that kind of normalizes that number out and brings it back in line with where our expectations are as a business. So yeah, we've been excited on that front. Those are like other data sets coming from warehousing perspective and other places, but yeah, big point of emphasis for us in the coming quarters.
Awesome. Okay, well, I think that does round out the questions that we had prepared for the panel. And I think that we answered all of the questions that were in the chat. If you still have additional questions or would like a little bit of clarification, just drop those into the chat and we'll answer those. But is there anything else that panel you all would like to add to this conversation before we wrap up as we wait for questions? I know we talked about a lot of topics, so it's okay if not. Oh, we've got another one from Raphael. So how does usage of MMM look in reality in a practical manner?
Hi, I guess I can answer that question. So we've actually had an MMM out of way ever since Google and Meta decided to not pass back their attribution data when that data privacy laws, when those data privacy policies went into effect. So we've been utilizing the MMM for years, and for us, it really, like, the vendor that we utilize will literally tell us you need to spend X amount of less dollars here and X amount of more dollars here. So they can really be that granular in terms of this is what you need to be doing. But it's really, I think, for us, really important to see those marginal ROIs. So it's like, are we really saturating this channel the way we thought we were going to? Or do we need to pull back? Do we need to push more? That's really where we see the most benefit, is those marginal ROI values by channel.
Yeah, I would say it's the same, excuse me, in my experience with Chalice. We'll often take the output of MMMs and use that for budget allocation decisions that we can automate. That way, we're not just saying this channel has been doing relatively well based on last touch attribution for the past month. Let's allocate more budget and hope it works. We have defined cross-channel measurement that we can use for decisioning and recommendations.
Awesome. Thank you all. All right. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I just want to thank all three of you for joining. No, Raphael, it was not too many questions. Oh, and you have one more. Okay, perfect. No, go ask away. But your question cut off, so you might have to type it again. But we're happy to answer questions. We have 18 more minutes. So, and Rick still has a voice last time I checked. So. Okay, so does that mean you look for a high R value and then set up rules to match that? So he said, I understood the logistic regression, but does that mean you look for a high R value and then set up rules to match that?
Yeah, so we're not just looking for fit in this scenario. So when we're evaluating the logistic regression, we're looking for its ability to be predictive of whether or not someone's going to convert given the marketing exposure and using the weights off of that. So we're looking at like an ROC plot or a precision and recall plot to basically be able to validate our results from the model versus kind of just looking at like how well does the model fit against from like an R-squared perspective. So that is essentially within the model optimization portion. And then specifically when we're applying the model in an MTA world, what we're using that model for is not necessarily to make predictions about the future, but to distribute credit in the past. So yeah, the goal of it is to take the weights from that model and say the weights can be compared relatively to one another. So like Facebook could be compared to Google. And if it's like Facebook is twice as large as Google, if those two touch points were in the path, we would end up splitting up credit 66% to Facebook, 33% to Google. And that's essentially how we're leveraging that model that we're building that is like a predictive model to then be used as part of credit distribution for MTA.
So the past weighting is dynamic and not necessarily rule-based, correct?
Correct. Yes. So it's based off of the weight associated, like the relative weight associated with the channel, and then it is distributed that way.
And that weight and that calibration is really what like a customer like Away is doing with their MTA model. Like that's really where we have not control. We obviously want the model to work as the model is designed, but those are the calibrations where like we're seeing, hey, maybe we do need to put more weight behind something. We think it has a higher value than maybe what the model is predicting. So those are the calibrations that can be made within the model as well.
Awesome. All right. If there are no other questions, thank you three for joining us today. Everyone here, you will get a copy of this recording in your inbox as soon as we stop the session. That should swing over to you in the next 20 minutes or so. And then if you have any additional questions, you can always feel free to reach out to us at Rockerbox. And if we can't answer your question, or if you have a question for one of the other panelists today, we will direct you along to them and help get you connected. So thanks everyone for joining us, and have a great rest of your Thursday.